How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great discussion coming our way. We're going to talk about how policy is only as strong as the person explaining it. It's coming from an upcoming ebook that I'm going to put out in the market very soon. This is going to be also very personal because I'm trying to lean on some of my own experiences and basically translating it back as if I wish I knew what I knew now then type thing. And I have two other books right now that are ebooks that are out in the market that are doing pretty well. If you guys get a chance, I would check it out. One is called Surviving a Mentor, 100 Deep Cuts Tips for Rookie Correctional Staff, because we know we have a lot of people enter this profession and we don't have the role models, sadly. So I wanted to try to look back at my career and see what are some good tips just in case, we don't have those role models. How do we fill those gaps? And that book is a really good bunch of lessons that usually would be translated down. But unfortunately, we are losing out on those senior role models. So I was hoping this book fills the gap. And then we also have Rank Before Ready, 100 Subtle Survival Tips for the New Correctional Leaders, because we are promoting people a lot younger in the profession. And what I mean by younger, a lot less experienced as we used to have. So these are some lessons I feel translate pretty well from my experience onto theirs. And then don't forget about the other books we have in the market available on Amazon, like Inmate Manipulation Decoded and Breaking Boundaries, and the books you'll find on Blue 360 Media. I think there's 6 now, including a recent book for rookie staff. So again, guys, policy is only as strong as the person explaining it. The reason why I thought of this, and this will be passage 4 of the book that's yet to come out, I had to kind of push it back, but it will come out soon. I'll have it as an ebook, and then it'll be published later as a soft cover, is because we spend most of our time in administrative levels trying to build clarity for policy, maybe even build some level of understanding, but we don't spend a lot of effort trying to translate buy-in, because that's the key. Because remember, as you push policy down, you need to create buy-in. You don't want that to be lost on its way down. So you really want to have your mid-level managers, your mid-level supervisors actively involved in the creation of policies. And then you want them to have buy-in so you know that you don't lose any of that emotion as it travels down to the front line. So this is just a reminder of how important it is for the people that have to explain those policies and what we have to do to keep them fueled and motivated. So again, they're in the middle, they're sandwiched. So most of the time, it's more about keeping the front line motivated or doing what management wants. But what are we doing for the mid-level managers to keep them motivated so they don't get burned out by being hit with pressures from both sides? So again, policy is only as strong as the person explaining it. When you get the new book, it comes out probably in about a week or two. This will be passage 4. The tagline for this is: a rule without clarity, presence, and conviction is just paper in the wind. Doesn't matter how well written your policy is, if you can't explain it, you'll never get buy-in. And that's a reality I've seen played out again and again and again over the course of my career. And I don't just mean explaining it with words. I mean translating it into purpose. Remember that. Making it matter. Without that connection, policy is just ink on a paper. And in a facility as complex, fast-moving, and emotional as a prison, paper on its own doesn't hold much weight. People don't follow documents, they follow people. And policy, no matter how clear, is only as strong as the person delivering it. So as you can see here, I put policy is only as strong as the person explaining it. That is key. That is why that is the title for this. You could write policy all you want, but if you have the wrong people explaining it, if you don't have buy-in, it's going to lose its value as it travels down. So I want to talk about first the illusion of policy itself. So we tend to put too much weight or too much faith in policy as an automatic stabilizer. We write it, issue it, and expect it to be followed simply because it's official. But here's the truth. Policy doesn't create connection. It creates structure. It outlines the what and occasionally the how, but it doesn't explain the why. And the why is what people need in order to stay motivated. Most policies documents exist in a vacuum. They're formal, they're wordy, and they rarely speak to the people who actually have to implement them. They're often born out of incident reviews, litigation, or public pressure. Something goes wrong and the system responds with a memo or a new policy. We overcorrect. We layer procedures. We double down on documentation. But in that scramble, we rarely involve the people closest to the work. And that's the first missed opportunity. So now we go into the disconnect between creation and implementation. So in a perfect world, policy development would be collaborative. It would bring in the frontline supervisors, department heads, and subject matter experts who understand the impact on operations. But too often, policy is written first and sold later, if it's sold at all. When administrators hand down policies without consulting those affected, they force buy-in retroactively. And that's a hard sell. It's not just about asking staff to follow a rule. It's about asking them to motivate others to follow it. That's a different level of commitment. If I'm a mid-level manager and I had no voice in the development of a new procedure, now I'm expected not only to understand it, but to defend it. Come on. To translate it and to enforce it, to inspire people around something I didn't help build. That's not just difficult. That's unfair. And over time, it creates fatigue. Staff stop listening, managers become passive, and policies become nothing more than paperwork shields. That brings us to weaponized policy and the gotcha culture. One of the biggest dangers with policy is what happens when it's used as a weapon and not a tool. We've all seen it. A staff member makes a mistake, or worse, someone wants to make an example of them, and what's the first thing people reach for? The policy binder. Not to guide, but to punish. Not to teach, but to trap. Policy should be used to support accountability, yes, but never at the expense of intent. When leaders bypass understanding in favor of enforcement, they create a culture where people no longer see policy as a shared standard. They see it as an "I got you" tactic. And once that perception sets in, it spreads. Staff associate policy with judgment, not clarity. They become reactive, fearful, or disengaged. The result? Compliance, not commitment. And sometimes, not even compliance. Policy isn't meant to control people. It's meant to unite them under a shared process, a predictable rhythm that protects staff and inmates alike. But it only does that if it's wielded with intention and if it's taught, not just thrown down. Policy as a crutch and what it reveals about leadership. There are some leaders who rely heavily on policy to cover their inexperience or lack of confidence. For them, policy becomes a crutch, something to hide behind when they don't know how to lead through nuance or interpersonal skills. They quote it word for word. They fall back on it, what it says, instead of what the situation calls for. They remove discretion from the equation, not because it's wrong, but because they're uncomfortable with judgment calls. But here's the problem. Corrections, it lives in the gray. No policy can account for every nuance, every personality, every fast-moving variable that unfolds inside a prison. And if a leader can't operate with some degree of human discretion, if they can't balance the black and white with the human truth of a situation, they will be seen as weak. Staff don't need robots who enforce words. They need leaders who interpret policy with integrity and purpose, who explain it in a way that connects to the job, not just the handbook. Turning policy into buy-in, the what, the how, and the why. My approach has evolved over time. When I'm tasked with rolling out a policy that was created elsewhere, something I didn't author but am now responsible for implementing, I take a few extra steps. I gather the people it affects, especially the mid-level staff who will be expected to pass it down. I explain the why. I tell them where the policy came from, what problem it's solving, and why the change is necessary. I invite their voice. Even if the policy itself can't be changed, I ask how we can implement it effectively in our space, what will help it land, what adjustments need to be made to our day-to-day routine. I prepare them for the next step because they are the translators now. They will be explaining this policy to their teams. If they don't buy in, no one else will. I emphasize tone. The policy might be dry on paper, but its rollout can't be. Energy travels through tone, and people respond to how something is delivered more than what's written. And then you follow up. I follow up. Especially with policies that create major shifts, I remain present, not hovering, but observing, supporting, showing that I'm still invested in its success. And if it's failing, we'll talk about it. Now, this part's key too, the meeting after the meeting. One of the biggest gaps in policy rollouts is what happens after the official conversation. Administrators tend to check the box once the memo is read or the meeting is held, but what they don't see is what happens in the offices, units, and day room afterwards. That's where the real tone is set. Mid-level supervisors huddle with their teams, the eye rolls happen, the dismissals begin, or in better cases, that's when the buy-in is truly forged, when the message is reinforced with care and conviction. So if you want policy to stick, don't just prepare for the first meeting. Prepare your people for the meeting after. Train them to carry the message with energy, understanding, and empathy. Because if it dies in the second space, it dies completely. How policy becomes purpose. When done right, policy just doesn't tell people what to do. It gives their work context. It allows staff to generalize their understanding, to connect the dots between operations and impact. It answers questions before they're asked. It keeps everyone rowing in the same direction. But that only happens when leaders frame the policy in a way that speaks to the department's function, the individual purpose, and the facility's value. And when staff cannot connect their role to something larger than the task list, when they see that policies are meant to support them, not stifle them, they step up, they adapt, they push forward. Again, that's just, we're going back into presence, delivery, and preparation. Rolling out policy is a leadership moment. Like any moment, it requires presence, preparation, and delivery. Presence shows support. You can't disappear after dropping new policy. You need to be visible, walking the floor, answering questions, gauging how it's being received. Preparation means knowing your audience. Speak to the concerns they'll have. Be proactive in explaining not just the rule, but the reason. And delivery is everything. Use a tone that inspires, not imposes. Connect the policy to their real lived experiences. Show how it supports, not complicates, the mission. And most of all, leave space for them to speak back. That's where the culture of connection begins. And then what I would tell new administrators, when I talk to new administrators, so people crossing into the admin position, I often say this: don't think for a second that policy will do the work for you. It won't explain itself. It won't motivate staff, and it won't bridge divisions. You do that with your words, your posture, your consistency. Policy is the skeleton. You're the life inside it. And here's the key insight out of all this lesson. Policy without presence is paperwork. True leadership transforms policy into purpose by providing context, clarity, and connection. Staff don't follow documents. They follow people. So if you want buy-in, don't rely on the words. Rely on your ability to explain, support, and motivate. You are the voice that brings the rule to life. All right, guys, I thought that was a nice little passage. Again, you'll find that in the new book coming out, Warden's Wisdom. It's a big book, guys. It's probably over 700 pages. But there's a lot of passages just like this that's centered in that book. It's 100 passages, but it's very detailed because this is the foundation right here. This is the knowledge that you need to not just be effective at managing prisons and jails, but to be effective at managing people. Because that's the key about working in corrections. You are managing people. And not just the parts you like. You're managing the whole individual, from inmates to staff, from volunteers to visitors. It's just so much that you are responsible for. And I hope that these lessons provide a little something to keep you motivated. Because in the end, guys, it's a lot, but we have to always push through. Effort over outcome. As always, guys, the show is here talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.